everyone. As Lauren mentioned, I'll be your moderator today. I'm Kia Puhm. I have the pleasure of introducing our panelists. First up is Gillian Heltai. She's the VP of Customer Success at Talkdesk. Gillian heads up CS and technical support, which is responsible for the entire customer post-sales journey. Next is Nate Rosenthal, VP of Customer Success at Square. Over the last 7 years, Nate has led the CS team on an evolution from a reactive to a proactive practice. And then finally, last but not least, Travis Bryant, Head of Customer Growth at Front. Travis leads the unified team of sales, CS, and support, which provides a coordinated approach of working with the customer. So thanks, guys, for being here. First off, let's just start by providing everyone with context for what does your company do, quick overview, and what is customer success responsible for in that context?
Me first?
Sure.
Okay. Hi, I'm Gillian. I work at Talkdesk. We build contact center software in the cloud. I manage the customer success and technical support team supporting our roughly 1,500 customers. In my world, customer success, I think probably like for a lot of us means we wear a lot of different hats. We're responsible for product utilization, product deployment, being that trusted advisor for the customer. We also work with them on all of their renewals and upsells, so we do have a large revenue responsibility given that we basically float the entire organization with the retention of our customers. And they work really, really closely with technical support. When I joined, it was the first time that those two teams were merged under a single leader. So we work really hard to provide kind of a single unified experience for our customers and make sure that they feel like they've really got a squad that they can go to when they need help.
And I'm Nate. I've worked at Square for the last 6.5 years. Square, some of you may know from just using the product out in the wild. We have originally known as the company that had the small white card reader that accepted credit cards. You plug into your phone, you swipe your card through. We also have a stand and a register you may have seen out in the wild. I think what's surprising to a lot of people is that we do a lot more than that. We have a real ecosystem of solutions for both businesses and consumers. On the business side, we have a payroll product. We have a customer engagement and marketing product. We have an appointments product. We have a lending product called Square Capital. And then on the consumer side, we actually have a peer-to-peer money transfer service called Square Cash. And we have the Cash app. And then we also have a food delivery service called Caviar. And so our team thinks about kind of all of those different things. It's a real diversity of customers and offerings, and thinking through what's the best way for these customers to actually utilize the tools that we offer to ensure that they are getting the most value for their business, and then in turn that kind of generates the most value for us. So we have a team of customer success, we call them advocates, who think through both the reactive inbound, but then also the proactive outbound. We have an operations team that thinks about kind of the end-to-end strategy and how we're operating. And we have a team that thinks about retention, establishment, adjusted revenue, driving those things.
Cool.
Great, and just like Nate is 6.5 years at Square, I'm less than 6 weeks at Front, heading up the customer growth team, which is a made-up title that I will explain. So Front is the shared inbox designed for teams. If you could imagine Gmail or Outlook working in a collaborative and team-oriented way, a lot of the modern communication elements you would expect around threading, assigning workflow, that sort of thing. That's what Front is designed for, and we have a lot of customer success and support teams who use us. So customer growth is really unifying the sales and success and customer support groups together. And so something that I'm really excited about is trying to really think of the customer journey by itself and starting there so that we can unify how we engage with our teams across that whole life cycle.
Cool. So one of the things that we as CS leaders are continue looking for is to accelerate our impact and the ROI. But each of us might do it in different ways in different environments. So in speaking with each of you beforehand in preparation for this, you did have unique areas of focus. So Nate, let's start with you. Square has evolved from this very reactive to a proactive environment, and there seem to be a lot of certain key initiatives that you went through. Can you give us a bit of a background to what what that journey was like.
Yeah, so I think similar to the kind of evolution of our ecosystem of products that's happened over the past 7 or 8 years, we've seen a similar need internally and operationally in how we organize as a company. When I started, we had one product. It was very simple. We were growing really fast, and it was kind of like, how do we stay afloat? We don't quite have money to pay for the types of service we want to provide to all of our customers and to really interact with them in a super high-touch way. And so how do we just kind of like get through what we can get through? And it was really focused on kind of churning through, whether it's 150 tickets a day or something like that, just getting back to customers, sometimes bulk responding to customers just to stay afloat. And that was really the extent of our interaction with customers outside of actual just product notifications that happened because you did something in the product. And then as the customer base matured and we moved from sole proprietors and super long tail to some larger, more established businesses and enterprise customers, we had to rethink how we were servicing them and how we were thinking about our relationship with them. And that continued to evolve as we started to bring in some subscription products and had to start thinking about things like retention and like interacting with customers who actually had a subscription with us rather than customers who were essentially paying us through their payments that they were processing. And for us, that really went from reactive, figuring out how do we kind of stem the flow of inquiry volume that we're receiving, where one of the major initiatives we did was actually looking at our case data that we had about our customers, mashing that up against what we knew about the customers when they contacted us, and then trying to use that data through machine learning models to actually predict for any given customer what is the next issue that they might have that they're likely reaching out to us for. And if we could predict that, we could often actually be more proactive and potentially even answer the question before they even realize that they've run into an issue or had a problem. And what we didn't realize is that we were starting to actually be more and more proactive in that way and creating more of a customer success kind of goals and mentality within our organization. And as that continued to grow, we kind of made a transition from straight customer support, reactive, inbound, kind of just answer the question and move on to the next question, to one that's a lot more thinking through how do we ensure that we're avoiding kind of the next issue that comes up. We're actually actively managing accounts. We have a book of business for certain types of customers. We have trigger campaigns that go out for certain types of customers, and kind of have evolved from there. So.
Yeah, and you did a lot of interesting work on data and analysis and get down to the point where you can see what type of results wait time might have on customer churn or retention.
Yeah, so I guess one example would be, like you mentioned, we took a look at actually the time that customers are waiting on our inbound channels to receive customer support, and looked at for the customers over a time period where we had pretty high variability in wait times. For customers who waited under 15 seconds, what did that look like to customers who waited over 8 minutes? And it was actually pretty striking, the results that we could see and tied directly back into churn. And that was able to actually convince kind of the rest of the company and our CFO that, wow, this was something that was really meaningful, and we could actually, for the first time, really connect the dots between customer experience and like an ROI on making an investment. I think some of the things that we were up against before was, well, why should we move our customer satisfaction or customer effort from wherever it's at now to a little bit higher than that by investing significantly in this? And this was the first time we were actually able to show that and put numbers down. And so I think that was our start, and then we've continued to grow from there as we think about cross-selling our customers. Really, we think about it more as education, so educating them on new products and services. When we do our longitudinal surveys as a company, one of the top things that we realize is that our customers don't actually know all the new products that we're coming out with that would actually benefit them. And so we've done a lot of work to look at, how should we be educating these customers, which customers should we be educating about which products, and how can we actually tie that back then to our adjusted revenue and driving our top line.
That's cool. That's really powerful. Gillian, you have taken at Talkdesk another approach because the retention rate is so high that data analysis or churn didn't give you enough information in terms of what you should be doing with the customers. So you've taken a qualitative approach as opposed to the very quantitative approach. Tell us what that looks like at Talkdesk.
Yeah, so I was really lucky. I joined Talkdesk about a year ago, and I entered the company, and we didn't have a churn problem, which is really rare when you're in the success field. You step in, and that's always the first thing that you're doing, right? You're like, okay, how do I solve this problem? And I was really lucky that was not a situation that I had to deal with when I joined, but it didn't mean that we weren't maniacally focused on it and that we weren't going to be over the next year that I've been there. It's just that, like you said, I didn't have this vast data pool for me to kind of dig into and figure out, okay, why did the customers that did leave, because there just wasn't really enough there to be statistically significant. So, I've, Talkdesk started in the SMB space. We've moved pretty quickly into the enterprise space. Enterprise is my background. And I think there's always this like really glaring temptation in SaaS to just do everything by the data, right? I joined, everyone's like, let's run surveys, let's build these triggers in Salesforce so that we can collect these pieces of information. And I was like, has anyone just picked up the phone and called any of these people, any of our customers? And they had, but not in that kind of like really deep, rich, exploratory way. So the first thing that I did was I went on a roadshow, and my boss and I flew to Virginia, and we drove to DC and to Maryland and into Pennsylvania, which is also kind of a funny thing to do with your boss, which I would recommend as like a nice quick bonding mechanism. And New Jersey and New York, we visited, almost 20 customers, spent a whole week. It was really exhausting, really kind of threw myself in and embarrassed myself in some situations, not really fully understanding the product yet. But it was incredibly valuable, and I know one of the things that we talked about that we're going to talk a little bit about later is how do you add value in the customer success role? And of course, a big part of it is retention, but another big part of it is like you get to be the voice of the customer. You know everything. Everybody wants a piece of you. So I got to establish myself really quickly by coming back and giving them just like all this wisdom that I had heard from customers that had nothing to do with Talkdesk, right? It had nothing to do with our features or our settings or like how simple it is to set up an IVR. Yes, that's the whole point. That's why we're growing, right? It's supposed to be simple, but it was about all this other stuff, and it really kind of helped us take a new position in support and success around taking the whole customer's whole problem, right? For all of us, and I know Front, like we work with Front. Caviar is one of our customers, so I feel like I kind of know both of your organizations in one way or another. And in the contact center space, my company provides a service that connects our customers to their end users, and that is like so sensitive and valuable and like full of rich information. So one of the things that we've really embraced is just taking on our customers' entire problem, right? It's like not about our software, it's about the integration with Front and the integration with Salesforce and like what's going on with the Caviar app that day. Like if the Caviar app is having a little problem, which it never ever does, we need to kind of be a part of that journey with them. So I think that was the big thing, is just like trying to get a bigger view on what our role is with our customers.
Right, that anecdotal type of storytelling back into the organization is also very powerful and can inform how you're operating. Travis, as a self-proclaimed reform sales leader, you have now come to the conclusion that there's great value in connecting the teams and having a coordinated approach. How did you come to this wise conclusion, and why don't you tell us about it?
Well, we'll see if it's wise.
Okay.
It's a bit early, but before I was at Front, I was at a company called Optimizely, and in leading the global sales organization, one of the things that I realized we wasted a lot of energy with everyone having their own metrics. So sort of to Gillian's point of just looking at the data, and marketing is at the top of the funnel, thinking about MQLs, and sales is thinking about closed deals, and then success is over here thinking about usage and adoption and churn. And the thing is that everyone is in customer success. It's weird that we think about it as just this department. And one of the challenges that we had was not being on the same page about who the customer was, who is the company that we care the most about, and who are the people at that company that we care the most about. And if we start there and everyone's on the same page about that, then the product that we design, the way we talk about it in the market, the people that interact with the customer, everything sort of radiates out from that. And it took us a long time to really figure that out. But in thinking about that, one of the things that I realized was that the customer also doesn't care what department you're in. Mm-hmm. When they talk to an AE or they talk to a solutions engineer or a customer success manager, they have goals for their business, they have things that they want to accomplish, and they want you to help them. So irrespective of the role specialization, you can't have the people, let's say, writing blog posts also do the security RFP review. You have to have specialization, but everyone has to understand the context that they're in that customer journey and how we move someone as far and as fast along that maturity curve as possible. And that's not a customer success thing, that's a company thing that everyone needs to understand.
The siloed organization, the siloed experience for customers. We all know that problem pretty well. Interesting, that's really cool. And you actually, when you joined Front, you asked to be the head of customer growth, and originally the search was for a CRO. Why don't you tell us a bit about how that came about?
Yeah, well, I mean, no offense to anyone who might have this title, but saying that you're responsible for revenue is sort of strangely disconnected from the point, which is to be customer facing. So to go and meet a customer and say, hi, I care about revenue, just seemed very tail wagging the dog. So what I was really excited about was this ability to get everyone in the company on the same page around the customer journey. And irrespective of what role you play, you have that sort of knowledge. And growing is sort of the point, right? Everyone is thinking about that, irrespective of thinking about adoption and usage and value realization, or if you're an account executive, you're obsessed over how to find ways to expand the relationship. Like ultimately, we're two sides of the same coin, and so the idea of trying to unify that in a title was. I'm still working on it to see if it's going to land, but ultimately it's this idea of the groups are all one team in service to their customers, and that's the main point.
Cool. So what were the biggest challenges? So we've got that anecdotal, using that for the impact valley, make those changes. We've got the data, the hardcore data that shows it. We've got this solving of this siloed approach and having a seamless experience. In making impact and customer success through these approaches, what were some of the biggest challenges that you came across in this journey in those areas that you were supporting? Is that for me? All of you. Yeah, anyone can take that.
3, 2, 1, go.
Yeah. And how did you go about addressing those? So challenges and what you do to address them.
I mean, I guess I'll kind of reiterate what I already said, which is, in the absence of data, you cannot make no decision. So finding out ways to kind of kickstart without it. For me, it was going through that anecdotal process. It was also a lot of internal navigation to understand what assumptions did people have that they were making in the absence of data. So I think, in thinking about joining that role for the first time and trying to kind of kickstart with momentum, it's really doing a lot of that kind of sleuth work internally as well to understand what are the assumptions that people are operating off of, how do the different teams interact to the extent of what you were talking about, and making sure that you can do a lot of that diagnosis before you get started, because it's really hard when you get later into into later stages, like 6 months in, 9 months in, you don't get to go back and do that. So kind of taking advantage of being new in a role or in a company to ask the silly questions and try to understand what the dynamics are so that you can best advocate for the customer.
What about proving the impact to the executive team within? Was there any sort of pushback of well, this is just anecdotal data? How did you handle that? Was there any sort of questioning of what you were bringing back, or they were all online?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. We're a very, very data-driven organization, but probably for a lot of us, when we think about our relationships with customers, we put a lot of value in storytelling. And I spend as much time or at least I did do probably less prep now than I did then, but when I started, I spent a lot of time thinking about the story that I was going to tell and how I was going to support my statements using both data that were available. And then anecdotes are actually incredibly powerful, particularly if you can get your CEO or whoever the leadership is in that meeting to hear it for themselves. It is one thing for you to say, hey, so-and-so said this. To actually have them hear it, have him or her hear it, is hugely impactful. All of a sudden, it feels like it was their own idea.
Right.
So making sure that you can get that executive level exposure, and your team too, that's the other thing, right? Like making sure that everyone, if you're gonna identify something that's gonna change the way that you operate, maybe you're changing your comp plan based on what you heard, maybe you're changing the way you're organized, you like really gotta be careful about getting buy-in with those things. So giving them exposure to kind of hearing why those things are happening is so huge for objection handling.
And has it been formalized internally at the organization of how you bring up those stories? Because, I mean, there's you, but in terms of scaling that up, what sort of recommendations would you have for the audience?
Well, I think it really depends on the stage of the company. We are a 300-person organization. For me, it's about, I've got a regular cadence with my team, which is a weekly meeting where I do a lot of knowledge sharing, and I encourage them to do the same. And we've got a structured format that changes with regularity. And then there's an executive steering meeting that, you want to make sure either you're in that meeting or you have someone who is a damn good customer advocate in that meeting to make sure that the customer is being heard. And if you're part of an organization where the customer is not represented in that meeting, then you've got a problem.
Okay.
Just to riff on the two sides of the data and anecdote coin, one of the things that jumps to mind is in thinking about something like NPS, which I know everybody espouses the philosophy and can relate it to just what's the score, but the more important piece is the system, which is the root cause analysis and the follow-up. And something that I've seen, which is giving me a lot of energy, is that even our CEO, Mathilde, she'll go in and look at the surveys, and they come into a shared inbox in front, and she'll look, and if those scores are less than being a promoter, then there'll be an automated response of what could we do to make it better. And when that response comes in, she'll follow up and she'll pick out and get those anecdotes. And then a lot of times we'll then mention the CSM, and because the point is not just to do the analysis on the score, but to try to go deep and get to the heart of what is it that is preventing them from being a promoter. So you can attack both sides.
Yeah, cool, love that. So what were some of the biggest challenges that you've faced in sort of this coordinated approach, and how did you go about addressing it, or previously?
Well, the early observations are we're in that part of our evolution where every customer is the same. We're not really starting to think about segmentation, and so when you mash all the colors together, it's brown. It might be a beautiful shade, but you have to start to tease out the purple, red, yellow, and green. And so Nate and I were talking a bit about this, that in the early days of Square, where it's just everyone's the same, and we're being very reactive. And there's an opportunity to then start to draw distinctions between the routes to market of the various segments, and then ask questions about the data to say, is this acceptable? Because we could look at logo churn and freak out if it's something that's higher than the benchmark, but it's only when you start to look and see, okay, well, we have really small companies who sign up and swipe a credit card and then disappear in an hour. Well, of course, then structurally, the logo churn is going to be different at that segment.
Yep.
And it's only after then we start to pull out the segments that we can think, what is the difference in the sales and success motions for that type of company? And then let's obsess over those behaviors and those metrics rather than making broad proclamations, because our goal eventually is to get to the point where every company on the planet is a customer, and we have a long way to go to get there, but you can't get all of them at once, and so we have to start thinking about those motions in very different ways.
Nice, yeah, that's comes as a natural evolution of the maturity of customer success within our organization, is figure out that methodology and then start to figure out that segmentation and how you start to differentiating to really make that impact.
Yeah, and then I would say at Square, so we are definitely very quantitative and analytical and want to know the data, but at the same time, we don't just throw the data out there and let people interpret it on their own. I think that when you have our scale, just picking one product like our Cash App with 7 million active users monthly, trying to kind of boil that down into, we have 10 minutes with this team or with this executive, and how do we get them to really align with us and then go and prioritize this to actually improve the experience. You can't just throw the data out there or just come with just an anecdote. And so I think for us, it's pairing both those things together, and it's starting with the data and understanding kind of at a macro level, how are we looking? But then it's really going deep and understanding, on a customer-by-customer basis, what does this actually mean for them and for their day-to-day, and how are they evaluating our product versus somebody else's product, and go there. So I think we definitely are data first, but then also looking at the qualitative as well. And that's a really important part, to Gillian's point around just the narrative and telling a story, and I think we're all storytellers here. And so that's been really important to us, is actually to keep a really close relationship and feedback loop between our CS organization and our product teams and our engineers and our designers. We have a shadow program where they can come, they can listen to it firsthand. We share call recordings in a really controlled way with executives and other decision makers, and really make sure they have a good understanding of the customer's struggle. And that's really one of our priorities over the past several years, but really forever, is really understanding that struggle and figuring out what are the tools that we can bring to help that and to make people's lives better and give them time back so that they can spend more time running their business, making their business better, improving their lives, those sorts of things.
And what was the biggest challenge in getting to that moment? I mean, it was a 7-year sort of process there. What was the biggest hurdle for you guys to cross?
I think the biggest challenge was just around like growing that fast. You're going to have a lot of scaling challenges. We had reorgs very often, which actually looking back on it, like needed to happen at different times. We had decision makers who came and left. We had a very quickly evolving product ecosystem, which we had to change to adapt to, going from literally no segmentation to a pretty robust segmentation strategy to not really thinking about churn, from not really thinking about churn to thinking a lot about churn and making sure we're doing the right things to retain customers. So I think just going through that really quickly over a couple years and having to kind of be adaptable and change processes and practices and procedures was definitely a big challenge. I'd say another around the data is that people are real sticklers around like experimentation, like how you actually structured your experiment and how sound the data is that they're seeing. And so that can be really challenging if you're not thinking correctly about your control and your test group and how you're running your experiment to actually come up with data. So those things create challenges where you know, it's quite easy to send people back and say, you know, there's a hole in your data, I don't care about your narrative, like go come back with better data. And if somebody doesn't want something to move forward, that's like spoiler, like that's the way to do it, is just send people back to get more data. And so that could be a little bit of a challenge, but I think it's bringing that all together and really packaging both the quantitative and the narrative into one that is a really compelling argument.
Cool. Okay, let's talk about results, because we want to talk about what the impact has been on your organizations of the journeys that you've gone through. So what has the organization, each of your organizations, seen in terms of results based on these on the way you've structured CS and these initiatives that you've implemented?
Well, I can start having the good fortune, like Gillian said, of stepping in and having an amazing net retention story so far. A lot of that is attributed to a great product, which lends itself to ongoing expansion because you have teams using it and then they invite other teams, and so that helps. But some of the instrumentation that we're doing right now, based on what we've learned about programs or customers that didn't quite fulfill their expectations, is specializing onboarding, for example. That's now a specific role, and someone who can really nail that and obsess over that, because we see a clear correlation with a great onboarding leading to great expansion, and having that as its own discipline rather than trying to layer yet another role on top of the CSM. That's something that we're experimenting with right now. The other, in terms of organizing in the team that's been effective for drive some of that customer empathy, is that we have what we call tooling and support engineers who are in the engineering organization, but they're really, amongst other things, they build internal tools for the team, but they're tier 2 support as well. And so just even having them in the engineering org and espousing what they're seeing in customer issues, and they are tightly connected, sometimes in the queue, even for tier 1 with our customer support team. They're sort of infecting the engineering org with that empathy. And two that highlight that I think clearly, hopefully what we'll be able to do is point to those sorts of things as having some correlation with better retention, lower churn.
Nice.
Yeah, so I think for us, looking at outcomes, you know, kind of top to bottom, even if we look at something like our support center, that's something that actually drives really significant activations and conversions for the company. And so measuring that really closely and understanding where, if we invest in educational content for certain topics or products or you know, issues that come up in different channels, what that can do to actually move the needle on activations and growth. I think looking at our online community, our seller community, it's been great to see both how that's been able to reduce our inbound kind of reactive questions that we're getting from customers, but then also increase engagement on our site and allow customers to kind of organically come across other customers who have a similar use case to them, who have found a way to solve whatever issue they've run into. Through using our services. So that's another great place. More on the account management side, we've seen really positive ROIs, significant returns on just having them do their day-to-day jobs. And then initiatives like our support org doing cross-sells and educating customers on, for example, the fact that we even have loans through Square Capital, or that you can do an instant deposit and get your money immediately if you'd like to, has actually been able to provide tremendous value to the business overall. So I think we measure it kind of across the board in everything we do. We try to understand how is this adding value to the business that we're working with, but then also how is it adding value to Square, and where do those two things meet in the middle?
Yeah, I love the triple win. You got to add in the employees too, and then you've got the three. Gillian.
Yeah, so one thing to add is, for me, it was all about employee retention and engagement. So I've done a lot of work. My team has done a lot of work to make sure that we're well retained and engaged, because honestly, like, the very best way you can have happy customers is to have a happy and really engaged team, and we do that by being incredibly thoughtful in our hiring. We look for people who are very diverse in their backgrounds to make sure that we're kind of rounding out the team and bringing in new skill sets. We do a lot of hiring for culture fit to make sure, because the team is really great and really cohesive. My team's only 25 people right now. Again, it's a relatively small company in general, so I'm lucky enough to be able to be tapped into every single person, understand where their head's at, how they're doing, what their career pathing can be. But it is really the most important way to have a successful customer service operation is to make sure that you've got a really, really solid team. We do that through the mechanisms I already mentioned. One of the other things that I did pretty early on was adjust the comp plan. A lot of us have probably either administered or experienced a comp plan that is very frenetic and driven by all these different KPIs and MBOs, and it's confusing and it's hard to know how you're doing, and we really simplified it at Talkdesk, and it's just driven on customer retention. How many of your customers did you retain? And what that allows me to do is hire people who are super driven and independent and thoughtful, and I'm not gonna micromanage them into how they're gonna retain the customers. Like, we're retaining them, we've got a good product, we've got good employees. So I try to give them enough flexibility where it's like, okay, figure out what that journey is gonna be and what you need to do. And so when you talk about results, it's the feedback I get from my team, the fact that they're well retained, and then, we didn't have a customer retention problem. We're inching it up. I measure by portion of decimal, which is a good problem to have, but it's going up. And in looking at our contribution to the business, we've been doing a lot more multi-year commitments, and it's not something we have to force down the throat of our customers because they're happy and they're engaged, and we ask and they say yes, and we're not a sales team. If they don't want to, we back off, but we get to really be their partner, and it works when you can create that type of a relationship.
Nice. I think we're time now. Quick parting thought to the audience in terms of them trying to prove the value and impact of customer success.
Everyone is in customer success, whether they're willing to admit it or not, and your job is to bring them along.
Awesome. Nate?
Gosh. I say start by thinking about how to make your customer's experience with your product as seamless as it can be without your intervention, and try to make sure you're not needed. But then when you are, make sure you're measuring that and understanding how you can actually have an impact.
Hire great managers. If you're team first, your customers will be happy.
Perfect. Great.